everybody. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Anna. I work for Houston Audubon. I'm the BirdFriendly Communities program manager. I graduated with my master's from EIH, so I'm always happy to help with any of the EIH workshops. And so I presented at this workshop last year, and I was like all ready to kind of present the standard BFC intro presentation. And then I realized that you all have heard that before and could go a little bit deeper. And so I decided to dive a little more into something I typically skim over, which is threats to birds and how individuals and schools and companies can kind of take simple actions to help reduce some of these common threats to birds in our region. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Houston Audubon, but I know we have a couple people from out of the Houston area. So Houston Audubon's been promoting conservation of birds and wildlife and their habitats in the Houston-Galveston region for over 50 years now. This includes being a land steward, or we're a certified land trust, and we had 17 sanctuaries, and we just recently acquired several new sanctuaries on the Bolivar Peninsula. So if you're ever looking for a good opportunity to get out and get birding, we've got some great places to do that. Our High Island Sanctuary on the Bolivar Peninsula is one of the international places that people come to see migratory songbirds. And our Bolivar Flat Shorebird Sanctuary is an important bird area designated by BirdLife International for migrating shorebirds. So the reason we started the BirdFriendly Communities program was because our region on the upper Texas coast is so incredibly important for a number of different bird species. There's over 600 species that have been documented in Texas alone, and over 400 in the Houston-Galveston region. And then we also, our location right on this central flyway, we end up getting 2.5 million migrants come through the Gulf Coast every year. And so our location is what is known as a fire escape. These birds are kind of crossing the Gulf of Mexico, and they're looking for a place to stop, rest, and refuel when they get here. If they hit bad weather, if they weren't able to store enough fat before going on their journey, they're looking for a place to escape. And so that's kind of where the term fire escape has come from. And so I like to start off with an example of a migratory bird who relies heavily on our region. And this is a buff-breasted sandpiper. They're an upland sandpiper, so they aren't necessarily, they're a shorebird, but they're not necessarily seen on the shores alone. They're actually more commonly seen in kind of grass fields, and they are a prairie bird. So they really need this kind of excellent inland habitat when they're migrating through our area. And so one buff-breasted sandpiper, this is a female buff-breasted sandpiper, and this shows she was put a backpack on. And this shows her journey that she took one year, and that she probably takes a very similar journey up every year. And you can see on the way down, she's kind of crossing the Gulf of Mexico to hit that little uptick, the isthmus of, or that isthmus. And but on her way back, she's leaving from the top of South America and cutting straight across right to the upper Texas coast. And so on her way down, she's traveling 600 miles without any ability to stop. But on her way back, she's traveling 1,800 miles with no ability to stop. And so when she arrives to our region, she is looking for a place to take a break and to get some water and to get some food and to rest without threat to her health and safety. And so I also like to go through this. I encourage you, if you are in Houston, to keep your eyes on the Houston area. If you're a Dallas person, look at the Dallas area. So I'm going to click through. These are the housing densities starting in 1940. So now we're in 1960, and red is dense. So that means there's a lot of people. 1990, 2000, 2010, and then this is the expected housing density for 2030. And you can just see that as people continue to move into the Houston region, to the Dallas region, our housing density is just kind of expanding outward. And the thing about our region in Texas is that it's used to be primarily prairie with some riparian corridors. And the nice thing about prairie from a human perspective is it's really easy to build on. You just have to mow it. And so it's easy to put in these housing developments. So it doesn't provide as many challenges as like a mountain region for coming in and putting in big old houses with big old backyards. But unfortunately, that means that habitat is not there for that buff-breasted sandpiper who's traveling across the across the Gulf of Mexico and looking for habitat to rest and refuel. So again, this is where our Bird-Friendly Communities program comes in. And I want to point out that the 4 steps to bird-friendly communities can be implemented at any scale. We like to say every green space counts. So it could be your tiny, tiny stamp of a backyard in urban city center, all the way up to a whole community or a ranch. So these can really be scaled up and down. And so the first important step to BFC is providing native plants for birds. When we rip out all that prairie, we're ripping out habitat for insects, which then feed back into habitat for birds. So most birds rely on insects to feed their young. It's an important food source. And of course, all of the seeds and stuff that come with native plants as well. And normally I dive pretty deep into the native plant, native gardening aspect, because it really is the foundation of bird-friendly communities. But this group's heard that presentation and is probably pretty familiar with it. So we're gonna forge ahead. So the next step is creating inviting habitat. And these are kind of simple tasks you can do in your community to kind of help replace some of the things we've, as people, have removed for birds. So providing feeders in areas where it's a food desert for birds, providing water features in areas where there isn't clean water for birds to access, providing nest boxes for species that don't have dead tree snags because they could cause potential harm to people. So it's all about kind of like refilling in those gaps and making sure that birds have places to survive in an urban environment. So the fourth one, which we're gonna not go super deep into, is connecting with others. You guys are doing that here. You're doing it by taking some of this information back to your students. It's really all about getting outside, talking about birds, learning about birds and wildlife and the interconnectedness of our habitat and our wildlife, and getting excited and passionate about wanting to take steps to protect our native species. So the thing that we're going to go into today is limiting dangerous threats. And so this spans a variety of different things, but I want you to, sometimes I worry that this presentation is going to be a super bummer because it's all of the things that people are doing wrong. But the nice thing is that there are simple steps that we can take to kind of turn things around for each of these. So it's go into it with a not super skeptical mind, and we'll come out at the end with like some hope and excitement for future endeavors. All right, so this is a quote from my supervisor, Richard Gibbons. He's our conservation director, and it was in regards to a event that happened in Galveston during migration in 2017, which we'll go into a little bit deeper. But it feels really, I took it from an article, it feels really fitting for this topic. So the Texas coast is the first land migrants encounter after crossing the Gulf of Mexico. So right away, they're looking for habitat. Some of those exhausted birds might seek shelter in the city, which is about as safe as a demolition zone. Beyond slamming into windows, they can get caught in fishing line, contact parasites, or die from starvation. So you know right away, you're coming into Houston and things are gonna be rough for you. But how can we help fix that? So the topics I'm gonna go into today are cats, pesticides, plastic pollution, and then collisions. We'll just dive right in. Everybody's favorite topic, cats. All right, so go ahead and put it in the chat if you would like your guess for what the answer to this question is. How many birds do free-roaming cats kill in the US alone each year? All right, we got some chats coming in. All right, people know this. All right, it is D. It is 2 to 4 billion. So there's been a number of different studies that have all come up with this same range of numbers of birds that cats kill in the US each year. It's a super tricky topic, right? I have 2 cats that are bound to make an appearance here at some point. But at the heart of this problem is that cats are an invasive species. And so cats indoors really is the key to helping protect some of the wildlife. So we like to talk about things like wind turbines and other things killing birds, and sure there is an impact there, but cats really are, after climate change and habitat loss, one of the higher causes of mortality in our wild birds. And it's a tricky topic because everybody loves their cats. So we have to sometimes take a step back because in my world, in the bird world, focused all about the birds, but really approaching this, outdoor cats have a much higher incidence of injury. They can contract more parasites. There's cars, there's coyotes, there's a number of things that we should think about. It's beneficial for the cats too to be kept indoors. And then cats want to be outdoors. At the heart of it, they're looking for that enrichment. And there's a number of ways to kind of simulate outdoor activities for cats without actually having an unsupervised free roaming outdoor cat. And so the new movement is catios, cat patios, and people all over the country are putting in these really intricate, amazing little attachments to their house that kind of either are on a window or on a porch. And it's giving the cat that opportunity to experience the outdoors without the free roaming aspect that allows them to go and hunt wildlife. There's also things like leash training for cats and indoor enrichment. I have a couple of feeders that I have stuck to the windows, and my cats love it. But they can get that hunting. They hunch there and their eyes get all crazy. They get that hunting environment without actually doing any of the damage. If you're interested in learning more about cats indoors, American Bird Conservancy has the most comprehensive website about this and about how to approach communities about outdoor cats and how to encourage your neighbors to keep their cats indoors. So I would highly encourage, if you want to dive deeper into the cats indoors topic, to go to their website. Okay, pesticides. So pesticides, this is more directly related to the native plant, the number one thing of bird-friendly communities, which is providing habitat through native plants. Because planting native plants is all about it truly is about supporting our native insect populations. And because our native insect populations then support all of the other wildlife populations in our area. And this is true in any region across the world. Without your native insect populations, you don't have birds and other wildlife. And so there's been a couple of interesting studies about the impact of pesticides on birds. And so they did one study and found areas with higher levels of pesticides saw an average rate of decline in bird species and bird numbers of 3.5% annually. And they tracked this over 10 years and saw 30% decline in birds in the area where there was a high use of pesticides. So there is a direct correlation with pesticide use and the number of birds you're going to see in a neighborhood. And then the higher that concentration of pesticides, the more severely those bird populations declined. So there just wasn't enough food to support those birds, so they're going to go elsewhere. And it's not just pesticides, it's rodenticides, it's insecticides, it's things, rodenticides are tricky because it'll kill the rat. If you put out rodenticides, it'll kill the rat, and then a bird of prey or a scavenger, like a vulture, will come and eat that rat and then end up dying. And so this is kind of one of the most important things to avoid for protecting our birds of prey. So our eagles, our raptors, is avoiding those rodenticides. And at the end of the day, that has a really detrimental effect on our food chain overall, is using these kind of chemical deterrents or chemical pesticides. Okay, plastic pollution. I have given a whole presentation on just plastic pollution before, so I could go on and on and on about this. So I got my start in bird conservation working on a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific as an intern. And that is the island it's Midway Atoll, and it's the island known for this plastic pollution problem. If you've ever seen the pictures, I kind of avoid posting them because they're a little gory and graphic and sad. But if you've ever seen the pictures of the dead albatross with all the plastic in its stomach, that is from Midway. And so it's right near the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and plastic is washing up every single day in huge amounts. And these birds fly out at sea and get confused with the plastic in their food source, and they're ingesting it, and it's causing all kinds of problems. That's far away. It's hard to kind of like wrap our Texas ability around that far away problem, but it is a problem here in Houston, here in Texas as well. In fact, I think now it's every single seabird species has been observed ingesting plastic. So there is this issue of ingestion. And when birds ingest plastic, there's two things that can happen. One, they fill up their stomach with plastic and they're no longer able to eat food and get enough nutrients. Or two, they're eating a little bit of plastic, and that plastic is causing cuts and tears in their internal digestive system, and they are dying a slow death because of these injuries. And I did a preliminary study looking in the Galveston Bay region, looking at the number of necropsy dead birds on some of the nesting islands to look at ingestion of plastic, and it was really low, which was super nice to know. Out of like 35 birds, we only saw 2 birds that had ingested any plastic at all. But then while we were out doing a colonial waterbird survey, we saw this a brown pelican chick, and at first I thought it was a tumor, but upon closer investigation, the bird had an entire plastic water bottle in its gular pouch. And thankfully, one of our partners at Audubon, Texas, was able to hop onto the island and actually manually remove this plastic bottle, which would have definitely killed this bird. We've also seen pelican carcasses with like trash in it that it was clear there's ingestion happening. It's just not at as high a rate as it is in other locations, like in the Pacific. I will say it seems like the #1 cause of mortality from plastic in birds in the Galveston Bay region is entanglement, particularly fishing line. So there's a couple of our partners, the Houston Zoo, the Texas Master Naturalists. I know there's a couple of master naturalists on the call, have done a great job working to educate the public in some of these high fishing spots like the Texas City Dike down in Galveston to encourage people to more responsibly dispose of their fishing line. But unfortunately, on our bird surveys, we're finding dead birds entangled in fishing line all the time. And this picture is of my coworkers detangling an alive brown pelican that was tied together with 4 or 5 dead brown pelicans. And so this one thing of fishing line took out 5 birds. The pelican was brought to the Wildlife Center and should have made a full recovery. But that was on this one day, that was like the 3rd time we saw multiple birds tied together with a improperly discarded fishing line. So bravo to the folks out there educating people. If you're a fisherman, make sure you take care of your line. If you see somebody not taking care of their line, encourage them, educate them. And the master naturalists are installing and monitoring these tubes to dispose fishing line all over the place. So there's good work being done, but there's a lot more effort that needs to be done to educate those, to prevent these entanglements from happening in the future. And then the plastic pollution problem is not something that individuals can personally fix. And I think most conservationists recognize that, but it is important to think about your consumption of single-use plastic and how it is impacting the environment. So Houston Audubon participates and encourages our membership to participate in Plastic Free July. And if you're interested in more details on that, we have a Facebook group going called Plastic Free Houston. And it is all kinds of fun tips and tricks for kind of removing plastic from your daily life, like shampoo containers, things like that. So it's all about refusing first and then the reduce, reuse, recycle second. Okay, so we're going to dive deep into collision prevention today. Collision prevention can be a little bit complicated because it's really 2 separate issues. There's daytime window collisions and then nighttime collisions that are light induced. And these 2 things they have totally different mechanics for the birds, and they can be confusing for the public because of these different mechanics. So first, we're going to talk about daytime collisions. And so up to 1 billion birds die each year on colliding with windows in the US. And about 50% of these hit home windows, so like low houses. And this is because windows are almost worse than invisible to birds. The windows have this tendency to reflect the sky, the vegetation, and they look like a wonderful way for birds to kind of continue on their path. This is particularly true when when spring is around and birds are flying around a little bit more crazy, or if there's a bird of prey in the area chasing birds and they're looking for a place to duck into. And so daytime collisions are really, about things you can see as well. Reflections, if you have houseplants, if you're having a window that has a lot of issues with bird collisions and you have a houseplant right by that window, that may be contributing to it. But there's super simple ways to fix this collision tendency. First, if you're building a new home, or if your company or your school is building a new building, thinking about how best to implement bird-friendly architecture is really important. There are windows that come with the tint already in it that birds can see, and so they know not to fly into those windows. And then there's also ways to build buildings that just inherently make it obvious that a bird cannot fly through this area. Unfortunately, a lot of these architectural features don't go with our love of these sweeping glass vistas and this beautiful, like, clear building. So there are windows that are specifically designed to let birds see what they're not seeing otherwise. And then if you're working with something already built, which isn't most places, there's a lot of pretty low cost ways to post fabrication add additions to these windows to prevent collisions. There's window decals, there's films. So the picture on the right is actually a film that is placed on windows. And these little dots I think it's every 4 inches, can make it so birds know not to fly through that window. In Texas, it's super nice because my house doesn't have any issue with window collisions because every window has a screen on it. So if you have screens already on your windows, I would almost guarantee you're not seeing window collisions. Blinds also help, shutters help, and then moving the plants away from windows is also help. Here in my new house, I had several birds collide with the window, and I didn't feel like ordering or waiting to order all of these stickers, and so I went ahead and just put string. I attached string across the window 4 inches apart, and I have not had a single collision since. There's also, when you're feeding birds, it's important to think about where you're placing the feeders in relationship to your house. So you can either place feeders within 3 feet of the house. So like I mentioned earlier, I have these like window attachment feeders, which birds are kind of flying to the feeder. They're not flying through, or more than 30 feet away from your house. So this gives birds, you're less likely to have kind of this flurry of activity that end up hitting into your windows if it's further away from your house. I think the more interesting type of collision is nighttime collisions. And this is something that scientists are really just starting to dive into and better understand. So most North American species, I think it's like 80% of North American species are migratory. And about 75% of those migratory species migrate at night. So the vast majority of our birds are migrating at night to get to where they're going each spring and fall. And again, around 2 billion birds migrate through Texas each year. So we are seeing a ton of bird activity flying through. And we're not 100% sure why lights impact birds the way they do, but it seems to be something with birds typically migrate using stars and moon and these kind of natural light sources as some kind of guidance. So it's thought that maybe this reliance on natural light is causing them to be fully disoriented by light pollution in these city centers. And when they're disoriented by this light and these bright kind of sky glows, they end up kind of getting turned around and just flying in circles. And when you're flying in circles in these dense high rises, the likelihood of you colliding with a building increases quite a bit. An interesting kind of example of this is in New York. The Twin Towers Memorial display is actually 2 beams of light shot into the sky where the Twin Towers used to be. And birders in the area, New York City Audubon were noticing they were hearing distress calls from all these migratory birds, and birds were getting caught in these light beams. They for whatever reason, they could not escape the light beam. It disorients them so much they just fly in circles until exhausted, they kind of collapse to the ground. So New York City Audubon worked with New York City and the people responsible for the light exhibit, and they were able to figure out if they just turned off those 2 lights for 30 seconds every 5 minutes, the birds were able to kind of escape this weird disorientation and go along their way. So it's just kind of about understanding what's happening and making slight adjustments to accommodate our migrating birds. So Houston Audubon started the Lights Out for Bird programs in response to an incident that happened in Galveston in 2017. Let's see, this picture on the right was actually taken of some of the 400 birds that collided with one tall building in Galveston on one migration night in spring. And it happened to be a night when there was some severe weather. big storm and some wind. And these 400 birds just hit this building, which was a very well lit. Everybody, if you've been to Galveston, you know what building. It's the only tall building in Galveston, and it's typically lit up. And these birds were attracted to this light, and 400 of them were found dead all around this building. And the building manager and the people inside this building approached Houston Audubon, and they were like, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And so that is what started our Lights Out for Bird program. And we based this program primarily on what we call Lights Out action alerts. And so the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Birdcast program uses machine learning, a ton of radar data, and a bunch of analytics of bird migration over the last 50, 60 years to allow them to predict when migration is going to be high through across the United States. And so they're able to develop these these heat maps. The example is right there. And so Houston Audubon took this resource, which was brand new in 2017, and looked at the weather predictions, and were able to kind of pick out when we knew that there were going to be high numbers of migrating birds hitting a weather incident in the region. And we would release these Lights Out action alerts with as many people as possible to get them to turn their lights out at home. And also with the hopes that some of these tall buildings would catch on and start turning their lights out during these mass migration events. And we had a lot of success with that, but not as much success with these downtown buildings as we were hoping. So in 2020, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, who developed this Birdcast program, approached us wanting to partner on these Lights Out action alerts and this Lights Out for Bird program. And when the Cornell Lab of Ornithology approaches you, you say yes, because they are the leaders in some of this research and they have all the coolest tools. So we dove in, and the plan with them was to start collision monitoring in our city and to expand our Lights Out for Bird programs across the state of Texas, particularly with focus on Houston and Dallas, because Houston and Dallas both made the list for top cities that are dangerous for migratory birds because of the light pollution and our location on the Central Flyway. We were supposed to start collision monitoring last spring, but everybody knows how that went. And we had to postpone it. So we're actually starting collision monitoring this spring. And if you are interested in participating in that collision monitoring, we are looking for volunteers. So please shoot me an email. It is a little bit intensive because it's some early morning routes in downtown. But the more volunteers we have, the more we can spread out kind of these early mornings. But not only was it collision monitoring, and I will say Dallas really led the way with their collision monitoring in fall, and they were able to get some groups together and really do a good job monitoring. And Dallas also got their city government to agree to dim all of the lights in the city during migration. So Dallas took the program that we developed and totally beat us with it. And so now we're super excited to get the city of Houston. We're going to be approaching them this spring. We're trying to get everybody on board to really think about taking the opportunity to at least dim the lights during these migration periods. And also Cornell was able to take their Birdcast technology and create automated action alerts for anybody across the US. So you can go to Cornell's website, it's actually the Birdcast website, and sign up to receive migration alerts to your email. And it doesn't matter what city you're in, you can type in your zip code, and you will get those when there are high migration numbers. You'll get an email alert that says, hey, high migration in El Paso tonight, be sure to turn out your lights. And so I encourage anybody to go sign up for those. It's still in the beta phase. The only thing they haven't quite been able to include is the weather aspect that we were kind of using to release these action alerts. So you do get more alerts each migration season than you would have gotten from us, but that's because they're just letting you know when there's a lot of birds in the area, not necessarily when there's a lot of birds meeting some weather. So it's actually a really great thing for birders too. If you're a birder, you can use it to get outside and get some of those migratory birds coming through. And so how can you help with this Lights Out program? Well, first, if you want to help with the monitoring effort, if you're in Dallas, I can connect you with the people in Dallas doing this monitoring effort. There's a group in San Antonio doing it. There's a group in Austin doing it. We've got some great partners across the state that are all stepping up, and we're all kind of using the same protocol. So let me know and I can connect you to the right person. But also, and more importantly, taking this information back home, back to your individual schools, back to your apartment buildings, to companies you use, and asking them to participate in Lights Out for Birds. By getting some of these taller buildings, we're hoping to see more dark skies during migration and get a lot less of those bird collisions than we were seeing before. Then the difference here is the Lights Out action alerts really are for more of these city centers. It's great if people will turn their home lights off during migration. I meant the less amount of sky glow we have in the whole region as a whole, the better. But we're really hoping to get some of these taller buildings or these campuses to turn out their lights, because that's where you end up seeing the highest density of collision. If your company, school, you personally can't turn off your light for all of migration, so spring migration is typically like March to May, and fall is like in September to November. Peak migration for our region, so over 50% of the birds migrate through our Upper Texas Coast region on those dates on the slide. So April 19th to May 7th. So if you're going to turn out your lights at all, we would want to target those dates, because that's when most birds are coming through our region. And I think these dates hold true for all of Texas, but as you're kind of looking at, if you're like from Philly or looking at Cleveland, the dates are going to shift. And I think Cornell has those dates available for all these different cities. So all of this being said, that taking many small actions really can have a huge impact for birds. It's all about some simple steps at home and some conversations with your work and your communities, and really getting every person using their network to kind of provide knowledge on some of these threats to birds, and to start to take actions. That's going to help immensely. Houston was nominated or certified as a bird city last year, and all of these different impacts are in our to-do list for the next 3 years to keep on working on, and to try and get more and more people on board, and to try and get more and more communities and buildings and companies to start to think about how they could just take these small steps to really make a big impact for the 400 plus species that we can see in the Houston-Galveston area. I want to say too, I just wanted to throw this in there. The weather is about to get really weird, and we still have plenty of birds that are not necessarily prepared for this kind of weather. So if you want to take steps in the next couple of days to really protect your resident birds and those wintering birds that we have in Houston, these are a couple steps that we put together yesterday. So it's things like keeping your feeders warm or out from freezing, and then providing wind breaks for some of these birds who really, truly, this is going to be the coldest weather a lot of these birds have seen in a while. And then also just thinking about these threats, cats being inside is more important over the next few days than it's always important to keep cats indoors, but the birds are going to be hunkered down on the ground looking for a place to kind of hide. So preventing these extra challenges for them is really important. Providing warm water is also a good way to help out. It's really going to be an interesting few days, so hopefully everybody can stay warm and stay safe. And I also like to end with what's happening at Houston Audubon. I know, again, some of you are not from Houston, but we do have some volunteer opportunities. We have what we call volunteer work parties at several of our sanctuaries. The Natives Nursery is still meeting daily with a few people instead of once a week like we used to. But if you want more information on volunteer opportunities with Houston Audubon, and again, that collision monitoring, please feel free to email me. My email's on the next slide. Also, this one I wanted to throw in because I know a number of you are teachers. Houston Audubon's offering the Flying Wild training, and I don't know a ton about it other than it's a training for educators, and it really ties in birds as a foundation for environmental education. And there are 2 trainings coming up, March 17th and June 4th. And our education director, Marianne Weber, is the contact for that. And there's a lot more information on this program on our website. If you Google Houston Audubon Flying Wild, it brings you right there. It sounds like a very cool program. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to Marianne. It sounds like a fun thing for teachers and educators alike. And then finally, we have a speaker event that is tying in our collision monitoring on March 11th. So Heidi Trudell is really, truly, she is an expert on preventing collisions. stays so up to date with all of the new information, with monitoring, and she is a wealth of knowledge for me in particular for kind of improving the Lights Out for Birds program and improving how we educate the public on these issues. So I highly encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about collisions and the science behind them, tune into that free presentation with Heidi on March 11th. That is it. I am happy to take questions. You can also always email me. That's my email address. And then a lot of the information I touched on today lives either or both on the Houston Audubon website or on our community website meant for all things bird-friendly communities, which is birdfriendlyhouston.org. If you want more information on Birdcast or on Lights Out for, it's now called Lights Out Texas, the partner project with Cornell, go to birdcast.info, and there is plenty of information, a lot more details, and ways for you to go ahead and sign up for those action alerts to come directly to your email. I'll take questions. Thank you.
Hi, Anna. I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. Some of the figures that you said said that between 2 and 4 billion birds get killed by cats each year. Just in the United States?
Yes, just in the United States.
Okay. Do we have a figure for Texas?
I don't think so. So a lot of those studies, that study, the main study I was citing was done by the Smithsonian a few years ago, and Pete Mara is kind of the expert on it. And they look at a bunch of different regions and kind of like look outside. So I'd be curious if there's Texas specific data, but I haven't personally seen it for cats.
Okay. And then of course the same question goes for building strikes, say 1 billion birds per year. Has that been broken down? I mean, obviously mostly in migration season, but has that been broken down by state as well? Is Texas particularly because it's in the fly zone? Is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. That 1 billion birds is across the U.S. and that is across both daytime and nighttime collisions. But we are currently working with Cornell to do collision monitoring across the state to better understand the numbers that are happening. And Cornell and a bunch of partners maybe a year or two ago, released an article about the most dangerous cities for migratory birds. And they kind of outlined why Houston is so bad and why Dallas is so bad. And I think the number one worst city for birds is actually Chicago. Houston was in second. And so that article is super interesting, and it talks a lot about this collision stuff.
So to modify windows, I think I've seen it where you can put little decals. Are they very specific and unique, or are they kind of a universal, it's just got to at least do something to break up a pattern?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are decals that you can buy that they're designed to, birds have like another ability to see past human eyes, kind of like ultraviolet almost. And so those decals are specifically to target bird sight, and they kind of blend in a human vision, so they don't stand out as much. But if you want to just make something at home, there are American Bird Conservancy has good information on this, but you can go ahead and it is that pattern. It's basically you space things in a way that a bird wouldn't try and fly through it. And so I put string out on my window in vertical lines, and I spaced it 4 inches apart. And that took care of all of the bird collisions issues that I was having. They do use window decals at Johnson Space Center, and I've actually been in touch with the folks at Johnson Space Center recently. They're doing some great things for birds on that campus and are going to even kind of expand what they're doing. And so they use the film. And so you can kind of buy this film, and it has a dot every so often. And it truly, I decked out my office windows with the bird shaped ones, and you put them up there and you're like, man, that really is kind of like a lot to look at. But after a couple of days, you no longer notice. People don't notice the stickers, and it really prevents birds from flying in the window. It's a nice, cheap alternative to replacing windows with bird safe glass.
So do they have, you said your strings were 4 inches apart. So are those decals, if you buy them, where they say that we need to be a grid pattern, 4 inches by 4 inches, and each square is what it looked like, a 1 inch by 1 inch. So they're pretty specific.
Yeah, there's specific instructions. It's something like horizontally it's 4 inches, vertically it's 2 inches. But once I finish up here, I'll get the website. But American Bird Conservancy has the very specific instructions for all of this different stuff listed on their website. I think we have it on our website too, but ABCs is super comprehensive. So
Okay.
I'll paste that in the chat.
So I am on a third floor. It's our only portion of third floor, and we have birds hitting our window all the time, especially pigeons. And we do have hawks in the area, so you can tell when they're trying to flee the hawks. They hit my window all the time.
Yeah, you can actually, they suggest doing it on the outside of the windows preferably, but you can do things on the inside of your windows too to kind of like stickers and stuff that if you can't access your outdoor windows being on the third floor. So there's a ton of possibilities. I'd also like to point out for teachers, iNaturalist has a bird collision project. And so if you see a bird that has collided with a window, please upload that information into the iNaturalist project. If you Google bird collision iNaturalist, it's the first thing that pops up. It's a great way to let them know where things are happening. And we're going to be using that information to help us develop routes for bird collision monitoring in the future. So please upload all that information into iNaturalist.
Ask you real quick. I guess I never understood this. Why do they leave their lights on? How is it beneficial for a city to have so many lights on? Has there ever been like a study done where you or whoever is trying to encourage them to turn their lights off, do like an economic study, so like energy wise, how much they're saving if they turn off their lights every evening?
That's a really great point. We've worked with, we're actually working with some of the contacts in Houston with the like climate change program, the climate change plan and everything, because the lights out thing really it spans the like astrological, bats have issues with light. I mean, the Dark Skies Initiative has been around for years because people want to see stars, right? When was the last time you saw stars in downtown Houston? So it really is kind of this, it should be an easy thing for us to fix, but there have been a few studies on kind of the people's love affair with lights. And it's all about this perceived safety. And so, especially in big cities, people are worried about being robbed or having things destroyed. And there's this thought that darkness allows that to happen. But there have been studies that have found light does not deter crime. And so it's all about this perceived safety. I mean, my biggest pet peeve is the car dealerships that like glow for miles. They're like the brightest thing in the whole world are these car dealerships. But they will not budge because it is a safety thing. It's a security thing. So that is the tricky part. I think Dallas was able to, that makes, but that's why a lot of cities have started to put the down covers on their like street lights, and that's a great step. But it's this uplighting. It's any of the uplighting or the outlighting that is the biggest problem. And so Dallas, instead of saying yes, we're going to turn out all of our lights for all of migration, they just dimmed their lights quite a bit. I think they agreed to dim their lights by 90% throughout the migration period, which like, okay, so there's still light. People can still walk around, but it cuts that sky glow pretty dramatically, and allows birds to kind of cruise over without being sucked into this like disorientation thing. But it's a great point. I meant there are benefits to turning lights down or out across the spectrum of conservation and environmental fields. So.
Another question about cats and feral cats in particular. Yesterday, I heard, and I don't know how true this is, that there was a huge controversy at Ormond Bayou Nature Center because there was a whole group of feral cats that people have been coming out and feeding and taking to get vaccines, and they're leaving them outside. And so they have like 1,000 signatures on a petition against Ormond Bayou Nature Center for wanting to get rid of those cats. So that is a very tricky situation. Yeah. The cat thing is inherently tricky. Like you said, it pits pet lovers against wildlife lovers, and which is so crazy because like you can be both. But for whatever reason, it has like caused this divide. And so what you're describing is a TNR colony, trap, neuter, release colony. It is the city of Houston promotes trap, neuter, release. So you go in, you trap these cats, you fix them, you vaccinate them, you put them back where you found them. Unfortunately, they've done so much research on these and they're not effective at keeping populations down.
when you're feeding cats in these like mass colonies, you end up attracting more and more cats, and you can never fix, cats can like produce litters so fast. 7-month-old cat can have kittens. And then, so if you're not staying on top of it, which nobody can fully stay on top of that because there's always people, cats immigrating into these colonies, it's just going to proliferate. And so it was a great idea in theory, this TNR thing, but it does not keep the population of cats down, and those cats are still out and about. And it doesn't matter if cats are well fed, they still have this drive to hunt. And there's been studies on this too. The most well fed, well exercised, loved house cat will still go out and kill a bird and then just leave the bird there, or still go out and kill a squirrel and leave the bird there. It's like it's so ingrained in cats that they just, even if they're not hungry, they're gonna capture wildlife. I don't know what the best answer is.
It's not Armand Bayou. Somebody said it's Bay Area Park. That's next to Armand Bayou.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, it sucks because Armand Bayou is a wonderful, wonderful habitat for birds. And so then you have these cats coming in and out of what should be a really safe place for birds, and what is prioritized as a wildlife habitat. And then it has this threat. I don't know what the best answer is. I think there's a lot of people dedicating their whole careers to trying to figure out what the best answer is, but it does require looking at, your sweet fluffy baby. So like, I've got my 2 cats, and recognizing that they are an invasive species, and they do have such a detrimental impact on our wildlife, and our wildlife's already struggling so much. So it's just such a tricky thing. We're just now trying to think about how best to get the cities to stop doing TNR colonies, and instead putting those cats in shelters. And if a lot of them are not adoptable though, and then you're running into the animal rights thing. So it's tough.
Yeah,
I don't have the answer. I wish I did.
Well, at this time, I've got one quick question. It's not something that came up in your talk, but windmill strikes.
Mm-hmm.
How significant are they in the number of birds lost every year?
Yeah, wind turbines they cause a decent amount of bird strikes. They do, but nowhere near. There's one of the publications did a chart comparing the different things that cause bird mortality, and wind turbines are very low compared to building collisions, habitat loss, cats, things like that. But they still do cause mortality. The great thing is there's so much research being done on wind turbines, both inland and offshore wind turbines, to look at ways to adjust their speed, their direction, their color. And they're having a lot of success in preventing strikes by making these little adaptations to based on this research. So like, I don't know if this has been like implemented yet, but there was a recent article that came out painting one of the blades of the wind turbine black was able to cut down the number of bird strikes by like 80% in a very small study. So they're starting to look at kind of implementing this and seeing how well that works. There's also the speed and height of the wind turbines can be adjusted for like based on the habitat. So like where there are a lot of birds of prey out in like New Mexico, Arizona, kind of the West, by slowing down the speeds of these turbines, the birds of prey are able to like avoid them better. By turning turbines off certain times of day and night, they're able to avoid bird strikes. So there's a number of things being done to improve that. It still does kill birds, but it's not one of the top things. And the Houston airport, bird plane strikes are an interesting one. I don't know how many. I do know that the Ellington, when the Exploration Green was trying to get established, we consulted because Ellington was really worried about the number of water birds that were going to be hanging out too close to their takeoff route. And so because that is a huge worry for these like very fast jet planes is like they'll take geese and like large birds and it takes out the plane, and it's not a great thing. So I'm not sure how many typically every airport has an on-staff bird biologist though to kind of help with preventing those strikes. and almost every, I think it's requirement FAA that there is a biologist on staff to help with that.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I see the job openings every now and then. But yeah, especially where there's known like bird habitat nearby, like Hawaii, those airports have several because it's just surrounded by habitat and
Right.
big birds.